There comes a moment in life when you stop explaining yourself, not because you're weak, but because you're finally wise enough to know that silence is strength. Let me say this gently, and then let me say it honestly, old age is not about fading away. It's about turning inward with courage. For most of your life, you were loud in ways you didn't even notice. Loud with proving, loud with pleasing, loud with fixing people who never planned to change, loud with explaining your pain to those who never listened. And you called that love. You called that responsibility. You called that being good. But here's the truth no one prepares you for. Aging strips away the need for an audience. In old age, your nervous system gets honest. It no longer tolerates chaos disguised as connection. It no longer finds meaning in arguments that drain your soul. You stop chasing closure from people who benefited from your confusion. And something sacred happens. You begin to choose peace over performance. Staying silent doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you finally understand the cost of speaking to the wrong ears. Focusing on yourself isn't selfish. It's an act of survival after decades of emotional labor. It's choosing rest over reaction, alignment over approval, truth over noise. This season is not about correcting others. It's about protecting your energy. You don't owe explanations anymore. You don't owe emotional access anymore. You don't owe your wisdom to people who mocked your boundaries. Old age invites you into a quieter power, the power of discernment, the power of stillness, the power of finally coming home to yourself. And this is where the real strength begins. There's a kind of exhaustion that only shows up later in life, not the tiredness of the body, but the fatigue of carrying everyone else. For years, you held space for people who never held space for you. You listened. You adjusted. You swallowed words to keep peace that was never truly peaceful. And you told yourself, this is just how love works. But age teaches a harder, cleaner truth. You cannot save people who are committed to misunderstanding you. So you stop trying. You stop explaining your choices to those who only want control. You stop defending your boundaries to people who benefited from you having none. You stop volunteering your time, your wisdom, your silence, just to be liked. Focusing on yourself in old age isn't about ego. It's about repair, repairing the parts of you that learned to disappear to keep others comfortable, repairing the nervous system that lived too long in alert mode, repairing the quiet resentment that comes from giving without being seen. And silence becomes your ally, not the silence of fear, but the silence of discernment. You learn that not every thought needs a response. Not every insult needs a defense. Not every misunderstanding deserves clarification. Some people don't want clarity, they want access. And you finally understand the difference. So you turn inward. You choose routines over drama, presence over persuasion, simplicity over performance. You speak less, not because you've lost your voice, but because your words are now expensive. Old age teaches you this sacred lesson: your peace is not negotiable. And anyone who demands noise from you no longer deserves a seat at your table. There is a moment, quietly devastating and deeply freeing, when you realize that being understood by everyone was never your responsibility. You spent years translating yourself, softening your truth, adding disclaimers to your feelings so others wouldn't feel threatened. You learned how to explain your pain in ways that made it easier for people to digest and harder for you to breathe. But with age comes a brutal clarity. Some people don't misunderstand you. They disagree with your self-respect. So you stop performing emotional gymnastics. You stop narrating your healing. You stop justifying your distance. Silence becomes an act of self-trust. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not everyone has earned the right to hear your story. Some people only collect your vulnerabilities to use them later. And you know this now, because life taught you the hard way. Focusing on yourself means you begin to listen inward instead of outward. You ask, what do I need today? Instead of how do I keep everyone happy? You honor your limits without apology. You rest without guilt. You choose solitude without shame. And here's the part, no one tells you solitude in old age is not loneliness. It's refinement. It's the quiet space where you finally meet yourself without interruption, where your thoughts are no longer crowded by other people's expectations, where your worth no longer depends on being useful. You don't announce your growth. You don't explain your boundaries. You simply live them, and that's silent confidence. It unsettles people who relied on your self-doubt. But you're not here to soothe their discomfort anymore. You're here to protect the peace you earned. And you do that beautifully by staying quiet. At a certain age, you stop arguing with reality. You stop trying to convince people to see you clearly. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head that will never happen, because experience has taught you something sharp and undeniable. Clarity doesn't come from louder words. It comes from firmer boundaries. In your earlier years, silence felt dangerous. It felt like abandonment. You were taught that speaking up meant strength, that explaining yourself meant maturity, that endurance was love. So you stayed in conversations that drained you. You stayed in relationships that asked for access but offered no care. But age has a way of revealing patterns without mercy. You begin to notice who only calls when they need something, who listens just enough to respond, but never enough to understand, who confuses your kindness with permission. And instead of confronting, correcting, or collapsing, you choose restraint. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. Staying silent in old age is not about suppression. It's about selectivity. You speak when your voice can build, not when it will be wasted. You respond when it aligns with your values, not when your ego is provoked. You no longer attend every argument you're invited to. You no longer explain why something hurts. You simply step away from what harms you. You no longer need closure from people who refused accountability. Your life becomes smaller in noise and larger in meaning. You focus on your breath, your body, your mornings, your rituals, the quiet joys that don't need witnesses. And in that simplicity, you reclaim something priceless, your emotional sovereignty. You are no longer available for chaos. You are available for peace. And peace at this stage of life is the truest form of power. There is a deep grief that arrives with wisdom, and it's the grief of realizing how much of yourself you gave away too early. You remember the years you stayed longer than you should have, the conversations you carried alone, the relationships where your silence was expected, but your presence was demanded. You didn't call it self-betrayal back then. You called it loyalty. But age removes the romance from suffering. You begin to see that endurance is not the same as love. That sacrifice without reciprocity is not virtue, it's erosion. And slowly, tenderly, you stop offering pieces of yourself to places that cannot hold them with care. Focusing on yourself in old age means grieving without drama. You grieve the version of you who thought being chosen required self-abandonment. You grieve the time you lost trying to earn safety from people who thrived on your insecurity. And you grieve it quietly, because not everyone deserves to witness your healing. Silence becomes sacred here. You stop announcing your departures. You stop warning people about your limits. You stop hoping someone will finally notice your pain and change. You simply move differently. You protect your sleep. You protect your routines. You protect your heart. And you realize something extraordinary. Peace doesn't arrive when others understand you. It arrives when you understand yourself. So you choose yourself without explanation. You let people misunderstand you. If it means staying whole, you allow distance to do the work words never could. Old age teaches you this final truth of survival. You don't need to be seen by everyone. You only need to be honest with yourself and brave enough to stay silent while you do. There is a confidence that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't correct people. It doesn't seek agreement. It simply stands still. In old age, you begin to understand that real power is quiet. Loud people are still negotiating their worth. Defensive people are still asking for permission, but you have nothing left to prove. You've learned that explanations are often invitations for debate. That oversharing is rarely connection. It's self-abandonment. That some people don't want honesty, they want leverage. So you speak less. Not because you're afraid, but because you're finished negotiating your truth. You notice how your body responds to situations before your mouth does. Tightness becomes information. Fatigue becomes a boundary. Peace becomes a compass. And instead of pushing through discomfort like you once did, you listen. This is what focusing on yourself looks like now. You trust your instincts without outsourcing them. You walk away without delivering a closing statement. You don't clarify your absence. You let silence say what words never could. And here's the part that surprises you. The right people don't demand explanations. They feel your consistency. They respect your space. They understand your quiet. Everyone else, they tell on themselves by how uncomfortable your silence makes them. You're no longer interested in being understood by those who only respected you when you were available, agreeable, and exhausted. You choose dignity over drama, alignment over attention. Old age doesn't make you colder. It makes you cleaner. Your energy is no longer leaking. Your words are no longer wasted. Your presence is intentional. And in that restraint, you finally experience freedom. Not the loud kind, but the kind that lets you breathe. There comes a point where you stop mistaking chaos for connection. You look back and realize how often intensity fooled you, how raised voices felt like passion, how emotional unpredictability felt like depth, how constant repair felt like commitment. And aging gives you the clarity to say, that was never love, that was survival. So now you choose calm mornings, calm conversations, calm relationships that don't require you to brace yourself. Focusing on yourself in old age means you no longer bond through pain. You don't chase people who disappear and return. You don't confuse familiarity with safety. You've learned that consistency is not boring, it's nourishing. Silence helps you hear what chaos once drowned out. You hear your intuition before it has to scream. You recognize discomfort before it becomes damage. You sense misalignment early, and instead of fixing it, you step back. You don't interrogate people anymore. You observe. You notice who respects your no without punishment, who honors your quiet without suspicion, who doesn't demand urgency where there is none. These are the relationships you keep, not because they're perfect, but because they're peaceful. And when something feels wrong, you don't rush to name it. You don't demand reassurance. You don't dramatize your exit. You trust the knowing. Old age teaches you that you don't need evidence to justify your boundaries. You don't need permission to choose ease. You don't need consensus to walk away. Silence becomes the space where your values speak louder than your explanations. You are no longer addicted to intensity. You are devoted to peace. And then that devotion changes everything quietly, permanently, and without apology. In this season of life, you begin to understand something profound. Distance can be an act of love, not the dramatic kind, not the punishing kind. But the mature kind, the kind that says, I will not harm myself to stay close to you. You no longer confuse proximity with intimacy. You've learned that being physically present doesn't mean being emotionally safe. And so you choose space where space is needed. You create room for your nervous system to settle. You stop forcing closeness with people who only feel comfortable when you are smaller. Focusing on yourself now means redefining love. Love is not access. Love is not obligation. Love is not explaining your pain until someone finally believes you. Love is mutual regard. Love is respect without surveillance. Love is silence that feels safe, not threatening. You stop chasing resolution. You stop revisiting conversations that already told you everything you needed to know. You stop hoping people will meet you where they've already shown you they won't. And here's the quiet strength of old age. You don't need to burn bridges to cross rivers. You simply stop walking back. You allow time and space to reveal truth. You let absence speak. You let consistency, or the lack of it, be the answer. You don't announce your detachment. You don't demand accountability from people committed to avoidance. You choose peace over proximity. And the more you honor that choice, the lighter your life becomes. Less explaining, less tension, less emotional noise. Old age teaches you that staying silent is not retreat. It is refinement. It is choosing relationships that feel like exhale and releasing those that never did without a word. There is a tenderness that arrives when you finally stop fighting time. You no longer rush to keep up. You no longer measure your worth by productivity, usefulness, or how needed you are. Aging teaches you that your value was never meant to be earned. It was always inherent. So you soften, you let your days unfold instead of forcing them. You allow pauses without filling them. You stop apologizing for moving slowly, for needing rest, for choosing simplicity. You understand now that urgency was never a virtue, it was a wound. Focusing on yourself in old age means befriending your limits. You listen to your body like an old friend. You respect its rhythms. You don't push through pain to prove strength. You don't glorify exhaustion. You choose care over conquest. Silence becomes a companion here, not an absence, but a presence. In silence, you remember what you love. You return to small pleasures that require no audience. Morning light, warm tea, familiar music, the sound of your own breath settling. These moments don't need validation. They are complete as they are. You also notice something unexpected. The less you explain your life, the more peaceful it becomes. You stop defending your choices. You stop narrating your healing. You stop offering updates to people who don't walk with you anymore. You let your life be private. And in that privacy, it grows stronger. Old age doesn't shrink you. It distills you. What remains is not urgency, not noise, not performance, but presence. And presence quietly lived, becomes the most honest legacy you will ever leave. There comes a moment when you understand, without bitterness, without regret, that your loudest work is already done. You have loved. You have endured. And now, your task is simpler and braver. You stop proving. You stop persuading. You stop explaining a life that finally fits you. Old age is not about withdrawal from the world. It is about selective presence. You show up where your spirit is welcomed. You remain silent where your peace is threatened. You invest your remaining energy not in fixing what's broken outside of you, but in honoring what is whole within you. You learn that silence is not emptiness, it is completion. You let your life speak without commentary. You allow people to think what they will. You trust that those who matter feel your integrity without words. And those who don't were never meant to understand you anyway. Focusing on yourself is no longer an act of rebellion. It is an act of reverence. You wake up, you breathe, you live gently. And when the world grows loud, you do not compete with it. You outgrow it. Because the greatest wisdom of old age is this: you do not need to be heard by everyone to live a life that matters. You only need to be at peace with yourself and brave enough to remain silent in that truth.